Meeting of Ways and Means. If you'd please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yep.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome. I don't think we have anybody here for public participation. I don't think we have anybody online for public participation.
Ways and Means member login.
So we can move on. A couple of announcements. One, we have a new member taking Sonia's place, is Rick Rasso.
Hi, everybody.
Everyone?
Hey, Rick.
Hi, Rick. Welcome.
Rick's a returning member. He was on the committee maybe 20 years ago? 18, 20 years ago, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And he volunteered. He said he was ready to get involved again, so here we go. He'll be on the education subcommittee, and welcome.
Thank you.
Look forward to getting to work with
Yeah,
you.
looking forward to working with
It's a
her.
good group. So in the form of kind of a heads up, I just wanted to let you know that we were formally notified that Shawsheen Tech has been accepted into the MSBA process with the intent of a significant remodel, or I assume rebuilding a new high school. And so I reached out. There's no expectation of any extra funding requests this year. Next year, I expect that we'll get a request for money for a feasibility study, and then they'll just kind of follow into the same process that we saw with Fox Hill and to some degree with the high school, just the scope of the feasibility study. So just to give you a heads up, just in case we didn't have enough capital expenditures in our future, we just added one. I don't know, 3 out of the 5 towns have to vote to approve it, and other than that, I'm not sure. So it's just something to put in our future. Well,
That's not going to work.
There's a regional agreement for Shawsheen as a board that I think there are 2 members from each town, so I think they vote.
I think they vote, but then town meeting would have to vote, because
yeah,
we
we
would
still
have to
have to
bond it.
authorize
So
it.
we would vote to authorize our portion,
Okay.
and that may or may not need a debt exclusion. We'll just have to see where we are at the time. And
Right.
so, and then we'll see. And people have asked, well, what happens if we vote no and the other towns vote yes? I assume we're still on the hook.
Usually that's the way it works,
I
yeah.
don't really know what happens exactly, but I don't think we have as much say as we have on the next project. So moving on, moving into the next item. We have an introduction of the high school building project. We have Terry Hartford from Dora & Whittier, that Terry is our owner project manager, and Catherine Bond, the chair of the building committee. They agreed to come and just kind of introduce us. This is not the time for detailed questions. We can throw out questions, but this is more of an introduction. This is where we're at in the process. This is the number we're kind of looking at and a timeline, and then we can address questions to them and have them back at other meetings. And I just wanted a time to get started as far as an introduction. So Terry, welcome. And
Great. Well, thanks, Doug, and thanks to the committee for affording us an opportunity to speak. My name's Terry Hartford. I work at Dora & Whittier. I have shared my screen, but I don't see it up there.
I'm going to see if I can make you.
On WebEx?
I'm through the
He's
WebEx.
Okay.
And it does show that he's sharing. It says stop sharing.
It does say you're sharing, but let
Yep.
me see if you're sharing.
There you go.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right. So, as Doug mentioned, the purpose tonight, one was to, introduce myself. I know some of you, I've met some of you separately. We have 2 members of Ways and Means, Doug and Chris, that are actually on the school building committee. So I'm sure that the high school project isn't foreign to you, but we thought it was a good idea as activities have ramped up and we're getting into this process, that it made sense to get in front of this group just to give you, an introduction to the team, 2, a little touch on schedule, 3, some options, and 4, some costs. So I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through this, but this is really meant to be an introductory discussion, as Doug and I have discussed. So please feel free to stop me whenever you'd like. Doran Whittier's your project manager. Do you have a question?
Just, can you scoot the mic over? between
Oh, yeah,
the two of
sure.
you?
Oh, what?
See,
I
at the
thought he
school
had
building
one.
committees, we're not allowed to touch the mics.
Bob slapped your hand down
So
because he wants it back here.
I didn't know what the protocol
Adjust.
A
was.
lot of freedom here.
It's okay, here you can't turn them off.
Yeah. So Doran Whittier is your project manager. We were hired back in November, a little over a year ago. We are also serving in that capacity at Fox Hill. So I'm the day-to-day project manager. Steve Brown actually runs the Fox Hill job. We both work for Mike Burton, who's the partner. I'm typically assisted with Rachel Rincon, so you'll see her. But Doran Whittier has been doing project management work for a little over 15 years, mainly public schools. And in addition to that, it's an architectural firm that's been in business for over 30 years. They design a ton of schools, public safety, very involved throughout the Commonwealth. So, we're a unique firm in that we have both owner's project management team and architectural team, which, we feel is a service for communities. So that's who we are. Back in February, after we got hired, we ran a competitive solicitation and ended up selecting TAP A Architects. TAP A, similar to Doran Whittier, has a ton of experience in building schools here in the Commonwealth, both MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and private institutions. Chris Blesson couldn't be here tonight, but frankly, I didn't think he needed to be at this juncture. But Chris and his team have been on board since last February and are hard at work. So those are the two folks that you guys have brought in. I put this schedule up, and this schedule is really more to show you kind of what we've done to date and where we are presently. So, we were hired back in that November. In February, TAP A was brought on, and over the course of the next 4 or 5 months, in something called the preliminary design program, they go through a whole host of different things, existing conditions. We figure out a space summary for a new school or a renovated school. We work with the district on educational programming. I think I mentioned existing conditions, but you have all these consultants come in, look at the structural elements of it. Civil, we take a view of the MEP systems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And, through that work, we then sit down and came up with a number of, I would call them concepts, right? About, okay, we look at renovation only. We look at an addition renovation where maybe we take down some of the existing school, we use some of the other elements of it, and we add a wing. And then we've also looked at outright new schools. And so that culminated in us producing, or TAP A producing, approximately 15 different options, which the school building committee reviewed and ultimately ended up eliminating a number of them as we concluded the PDP, which was in November. And right now, we presently have, I would call it 4 options that remain on the table. I'm going to pause there for a moment, and just, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or should I just keep going?
I just wanted to,
Yeah.
there are 5, but the 5th has an A and a B.
Right.
Because I don't want people who heard 5 to think that they're 4. It's 5, and 5 is A, B.
Right.
So
So there's
I know I'm going to get that call tomorrow,
Yeah.
so I thought I'd better say something.
5 or 6 then?
There are 5 options. The 5th one is an
So-
A option and a B option.
So I've pulled these up now. So a couple of important notes, the where the building committee went to, and we've actually just produced a video that's on our website, bhsbuildingproject.com, that demonstrates or details how that process went and why certain options were eliminated. A renovation-only option was eliminated, and primarily due to it's probably the most expensive option. And there's a bunch of pros and cons. I'm not going to go into that with each of them. I'll show you some pricing. But what's presently being considered is what you see on the screen. There are two addition renovations. They're called AR2 and AR8. And we've had this problem before, determining where you are on the site. If you look here, and I'm going to put my mouse on AR8, this is the existing school building site, yeah? If you know the building well, this is the cafeteria that I'm focused on. This is sort of district offices and BCAT. And this is like the center core of the building that you no longer would be changed. And down here you have the gymnasiums, if that makes sense. And this contemplates creating a 3-floor addition here that would house mainly the academic elements of the program. Do you want me to try and
Make it
zoom
bigger.
that?
Yeah.
No, I think it's the local
We've got it.
WebEx
Yeah. I don't,
needs to change what it shows, that's all.
yeah, I don't know how to do
Okay,
that.
don't worry about
I mean,
it.
it's
Press on.
big over here, but I don't
Doug did email this to everyone if you want to
Yeah.
zoom it on your personal.
Right.
Yeah, so, effectively, both addition renovations include keeping elements of the existing building as well as building a new wing to house the academic spaces. It's really designed to try and limit swing space. Swing space typically comes in the form of modulars and is kind of a sunk cost that most communities seek to avoid. And in this project, you could have modulars, you could have kids in school that never go into a school, that they would be in modulars for 4 years. And I think the committee rightfully said that's not something we're willing to entertain. So that's what the two addition renovations presently are. We also have effectively, well, this is the 3, right? So if you look down here, NC1, you see the existing building here, yeah? The outline. This is a narrow, thin building that effectively extends through the existing student parking lot. It's, again, a 3-story building. It is defined by that size because of the conditions of the site. There are a number of wetlands that surround that facility. We did do an ANRAD, which is something you do through the Conservation Commission to make sure that we understood the delineations of wetlands presently, and that's what dictates that building shape. So that's one consideration. As we work through the PDP, we discussed with the committee the concept of building on the existing varsity field. Those are the two options that you see down here on the bottom right, NC4 and NC5. Effectively, the differences between those two buildings is shape and orientation. And so, but what's housed within those is similar. So, those are just two different designs. I think when it comes to that, at this juncture, I view them as kind of one, and then we figure out what the actual shape will be. But it's designed to house the program, and I don't think I mentioned that. So we need effectively 220,000 square feet based on an 1,100 student population. And so there's all these calculations that go into space summary to meet the academic program that we've worked with the district. And that methodology is exactly what pretty much every school does that's in the MSBA program. So it defines space, so that leads to square footage, which then allows you to determine what cost will be. So this is Cambridge Street down here that you see here. It's same entrance that skirts around the existing track and field. And so one element of that is if we were to do that, we would be losing the varsity field. And so obviously that then means, well, what do we do? And so right now we're exploring a number of options of things that we can do on site. Again, we have some wetlands issues. So, but one concept that has been explored is the center core of the building. Have many of you been in the high school? I'm assuming yes. The high school is challenged by its site. There's a massive elevation change from one end of the building to the other. If you think of the center core of the building, that is the biggest problem with that building from an accessibility standpoint. They call them the streets. They'd be great on a skateboard, terrible in a wheelchair. It's really an element of the building that, yes, could be renovated at a massive cost, and I don't think it would result in something that you would want in terms of literally stair lifts to get. There's 13 different roof elevations in that building. It's a real challenge, and that center core is something that we really need to deal with. And so in the concept of a new building, we've talked about basically demolishing that center core, leaving a number of these two buildings here. So this, again, includes currently the cafeteria, the district offices. I think I've mentioned this. One of the challenges that, it's not a challenge, it's kind of, it's part and parcel of this project. There's a ton of community elements of the high school presently. So you've got BCAT, you have an early childhood learning center, you have district offices. All of that typically doesn't fall into the construct of a high school only, but it does here because we need to deal with it. And that's been made abundantly clear to us from the school building committee. And so these newer options basically afford us the opportunity to keep what is still functional, renovate it, keep the district offices, keep BCAT. We would effectively, in this process, right around here is where the childhood center is. That would then get relocated over here where the existing cafeteria is. We would also then keep both gymnasiums on the northern end of the site. And what that then affords you is this huge open space. And so one concept that we've talked about is replacing varsity field and track. There, you would, this, because of the elevation change, and some of you probably don't know this, there's literally like a catacomb in the basement of the high school. I think Noah's Ark could be down there. It's a very interesting space. If any of you have gone, you know what I'm talking about. But effectively what that would allow us to do, right, is from the elevation change here, you could put bleachers in here, you would have a full track, you would have a field, and then beginning about here, we would then need to basically flatten the elevation to have a flat field, affording ourselves effectively a sub-basement that could be used for parking. Does it need to be used for parking? No, but the surface needs to be leveled, and that is already excavated, so there's no blasting, there's no excavation. It would be part and parcel with the site, and effectively you then get to the gymnasium side where you would be walking in at the entrance of that elevation. So it's a neat concept, one that we're exploring, candidly, and I'm sure you've heard, there's a lot of concern from abutters and probably others in town about utilizing the existing varsity field and putting it here, noise, light, the things that you would expect people to be concerned with. What I will tell you is that it's an option right now and that we're continuing to progress, evaluating each of these options. And so that's where we are in terms of the options. So back in November, when we presented this to the school building committee, what comes with that is estimates for each of the options. And I mentioned that there were other ones. I've included this because this is what has been shown to the public. This is what's in the PDP that's on our website. And it shows the costs to do a variety of the options. And, the way I described it and where we are now is that in terms of cost for any solution, right, that number begins likely with a 3. And the numbers are somewhere between $3 and $350 million. And we are in early stages, but when you go and do this process and come up with these estimates, the square footage, they go to independent third-party estimators that basically work on every public project in the Commonwealth. So the numbers reflect what has been done recently and what's being projected into the near future. And so I know people get upset when they hear these numbers, but, you know, at upwards of $900 to $1,000 per square foot for construction costs, and then you add in what will be determined as soft costs, so fees, contingency, everything else that falls into that adds an additional 20 to 25%. And so that's where these numbers kind of line up. So this is one slide that I showed, or that the architect showed in November. I did show another slide here that kind of broke down this difference between non-high school programming and high school programming. And I think where I am and Catherine is that we need to deal with all of that space. And so this slide, while another indicator, is really no different than the slide previously. But all of them are available on our website, and that's presently where we sit. And so then I think I'll come back, and then I'll ideally be quiet. From a schedule perspective, where we are, we're in something called the preferred schematic design, where we are looking to come up with a preferred option. And the idea, or it's not an idea, is as we work through that process, we get to one option in the next 2 months. Is it 2 months? Possibly. Is it 3 months? Probably more likely. But we are coming with a preferred option. That option then goes into something called schematic design, which we would do over the course of the rest of the spring and summer. That goes to 2 different estimators. That comes with an actual like sticker price. And the intention is to then bring that to town meeting in the fall. If we were to miss that, there's the January town meeting. You know, I think right now things are pretty fluid in terms of where we are, but that's the schedule that we're looking to achieve.
And I think you may have said it, but if you didn't, even though it's not an MSBA project, we're following the MSBA process. It's a proven process, and we think it makes sense, especially for something that's this important and this big, to not reinvent the wheel, even though we have the freedom to do things slightly differently. We felt like it was very important to follow that same process. So.
Any general questions that would guide future discussions or that give them some idea of where your heads are? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the plan is, at least according to schedule, is to narrow down to one choice sort of around March is what I'm hearing. Okay, so you're about 2 months away from that point, it sounds like. In terms of looking at the green chart, looks like a great one here. It seems like some of these have the non-high school programming and some don't. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, they don't. So the number's more in the middle here, where it says total project cost, right?
I'm looking at 5A in particular, for example.
5A.
It has no.
Right, but so then if you look to the far right, we've included $35 million effectively to renovate the existing non-high school programming space.
Okay, so that's how that's being covered.
Correct.
The existing buildings.
Right.
Okay, so all these choices in the levelized costs then have an allowance for doing the non-high school program?
They do.
So that they're apples to apples.
That's the intent, is
Okay.
to say, and you know, one of the things that came out of after the PDP in December was to not, I don't want to use the word force, but get the committee to agree that non-high school programming is a part of this project. And that's great. It allows us to know the size of the box.
Which makes sense.
Yep.
And then, is there any allowance for demolition costs here?
Yes. Yep. And so there is, this this spreadsheet or this representation here in the PDP, and I'm happy to forward it to Doug. I can cut and paste that out so you don't have to go searching for it. Basically goes through a line-by-line estimate of what is included, and demolition is included in each of those instances.
Okay,
That was something we requested, because even, no matter what option, again, we didn't even know what option we were going to have, but the bottom line is we did not want an empty building sitting there after we did whatever we did, that we had to maintain or would just disintegrate and be terrible, so.
Okay, so just to be clear, it seems like these levelized costs are apples to apples in the sense that they have this, they
Correct.
facilitate the same amount of programming.
Correct.
They don't have leftover buildings.
And that's why I did that specifically, because it was, and it was evolving, and what I didn't want to do was, I want to be consistent, transparent as to what we're showing the public, and so to create something new for this group, when I've just shown this in the last 2 months, it's not really worth it, in my opinion, because then it's 3 pieces of paper as opposed to 2. But ultimately, all of this is included in our PDP. Again, the website has a ton of information on it. It has all of the PDP documents. It has all of the SBC meetings, all the materials that we present each month. BCAT obviously films us just like we get filmed here. And so, I encourage you to watch some of those meetings, in particular the last 2 or 3. You can do them at double speed so that the 3-hour meeting goes down to an hour and a half. My voice elevates a little bit, but the message is still the same.
And we do have, if needed, we have some larger pieces of paper to look at this. If you request it, we can certainly find a way to get it to you. I think you've seen some of it, Doug, because you're part of the group, and it is easier to visualize on a larger scale.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Frank?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have 2 Ways and Means people on this, right? Ed and Roger on this committee?
No, I'm on this.
You're on it.
Chris?
And Chris is on the committee.
Chris,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I guess I got,
You're thinking.
They're on Fox Hill.
Fox Hill.
Yeah.
nice try, though.
Just kidding. Your project.
So what we have to get our arms wrapped around, and I don't want to go into it here tonight, but I think we know something, for certain, that when the schedule gets firmed up a little bit more so that we start to get into actually figuring out financing, how it's financed, the timing of the financing, we're pretty sure that we will make this tied to a debt exclusion vote, which will go out to the town. So we have to figure out a couple of things. Number one, firm enough number on the cost and a firm enough schedule that we can time it against, preferably an April general election with this on the ballot, whenever that is. Okay. And the reason I think that's important to everybody is because that governs an awful lot of what aspects of this you turn on full bore and when, right? So if we can't support a debt exclusion, in 2025, then this whole thing moves a year, roughly.
So, and I'm glad you brought that up. So if town meeting approves it, it then goes on the general ballot, correct?
Well,
They can be,
I don't really know we should go into all of that.
The select board decides that.
Yeah,
Well, and the select board decides.
they decide if they're going to support a debt exclusion.
Right.
Right, town meeting, Ways and Means, everybody can give recommendations to them.
Right.
But until the debt exclusion is on the ballot and prosecuted, I really don't think town meeting is going to take any action on funding, personally.
Well,
the only thing they could do, as we talked about with Fox Hill, you could ask for a contingent upon debt exclusion.
So put the warrant article for funding prior to the...
Right, just if you had to, timing-wise, you could
Yeah.
do that and make it contingent on a
So you guys
positive
need
vote.
to figure out what the right way to
Yeah.
sort of scope out the timing is and which pieces come when. I think that's pretty critical. I think it's probably semi-obvious that we're looking at around 300 million. And so, that gives us a pretty good idea of what's going to happen to the deck schedule if it's voted on. And it goes to town meeting for a warrant, the warrant's approved, and then sometime, 12 to 24 months after that, the big money starts to hit. And that's when we can roll that into these projection plans. So that's how we get our arms around what it's going to do to the taxpayer and what it's going to do to the levy.
So the mechanics of that is something I've spoken to Catherine about, and I don't know if it's somebody from Ways and Means or if is John here.
Yeah, clearly the administration should be
And
involved
we
in
should
all of that.
we should map that out, because I think it's a little
Right?
muddy.
I'd say it's muddy right now.
It's
Yeah.
muddy, and we need to clear that. We need to clear that up.
Right.
So I would welcome that, and maybe I'll reach out to John in the first instance.
Yeah, I would
to figure
suggest
that out.
you do take a stab at that, because that puts into better perspective
Yep.
what these other pieces are, and
Yep.
estimators come in and all of that, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's.
And what I will tell you, though, is that our present schedule is to have a firm number with a preferred option by the fall. That I know. Where we go from there
Right.
is, I think, what you're talking about.
That would be great input to figuring out the rest of it, actually.
Right.
Right?
That is absolutely the intention, and that's what TAP A is tasked with. That's their work plan, and that's what we intend to complete. So, Catherine mentioned this is a process. When we signed on, it was like, okay, this is how long this should take, and we worked out our work plan to November of this year. That's the intention. Sure, we can delay it for years and years and years, but
Well, I don't want to
then,
get too extreme.
yeah,
Right.
right.
I mean,
So you realize people stop working at some point. Like, that's just the nature.
I don't see it as a delay. I see it
Right.
as getting the timing right to
Right.
get the debt exclusion and the warrant.
Yeah,
Right.
it doesn't
Settle.
have to wait it could be a special election, so it doesn't have to wait till April, because that's a 6-month
And
delay.
again, that's probably should be worked out in the subcommittee, I guess. That's a very good point. Thank you.
So is there a subcommittee of Ways and Means?
No, I think
No.
these two guys,
Right.
I know where we live.
Yeah.
Roger.
I guess a real concrete question. When do you run out of money and have to stop working?
So the process that we've put in, and we're both on fixed fees. So the town allocated $1.5 million, and I'll just put these numbers out there for you. Dorn Whittier was hired for $450,000. The TAP A is in at $950,000, including all of their consultants. We left $100,000 for the town because expenses come up that fall outside of the scopes of either the designer or the OPM, and that money is projected to run out in November. But that's based on a deliverable of getting through schematic design and delivering that so that you can go to funding.
Okay. So I guess my point is that I think we need to figure out the timing of the debt exclusion and the authorization of the funding, and keep the project moving. So if you were to propose that we wait till next April and work stops in November, there's a lot of lost time and momentum there. And I think that would be a big mistake. So when you figure out the schedule, we may need a special election to get it done.
Yeah.
Whatever that means to getting the populace out to vote. I don't want the project to lose momentum because we've blown the timing.
Right, and I think you had this same issue at Fox Hill where there's like a pause, like the designer, the OPM finished their work, but now we're waiting on a vote to effectively move the project forward. I don't think it was too dramatic at Fox Hill, but there was sort of like a little bit of downtime waiting for that approval, and thankfully they got it, which is great. And I know that project
That was only
off and
town
running.
meeting.
Yep.
That was only the authorization, not a general vote. Anyway, that's it for me.
Chris?
So I think this won't be a surprise, but I'm definitely in favor of decoupling it from the town election. For the sole purpose of taking the politics out of this for people who are running the state and solely focusing on an up and down vote on this type of a project. And really trying to just get the town to say, is this what we want or not? And then not also have people running for, against, whatnot. And I think the momentum is really important, but I think this is an important enough issue to do that. And I think last time we asked, it was roughly $30,000, somewhere around there. What that's Amy, but
Yeah.
roughly around there for a special election. I know that's expensive, but this is $300 million roughly that the town is going to vote on that will definitely be hitting them. So I definitely think that that special election is really what should happen.
Anybody else?
We'll all talk to the selectmen, select board.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it. And I'm happy to come back to give you guys updates, probably not for a bit of time, but, we are available. We have our monthly SBC meetings. I imagine Chris and Doug will keep you guys updated, but we're happy to meet up with all of you. So thank you again, and good luck with the rest of your agenda.
Thank you.
It looks rather full.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
So coming up next, we've got John Denizio just to do the budget guideline presentation. And
Me or is it on in here?
John, I'm going to get out of your way.
looks like
Just
Paul
shut this thing
Segarino will
off.
be joining.
Can we lower the heat a little bit in here?
It's pretty warm.
Yeah, like, I feel like I'm on Aruba.
That's true. I was on the hot seat. I've warmed it up for you.
Yeah, in fact, we sort of suspect they are.
It said it's 68, it says it's 78.
Only after the gym will be over there. Yeah.
Open the window.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I know everybody in here is quite familiar with what guidelines are and what we're doing here. And we have an annual budget summit that we were able to have last week or the week before, I can't remember which, where we have representation from the school department, the select board, Ways and Means, town administration, the finance team. We get together and we talk about the upcoming year. Well, we talk about where we ended this current year when we set the tax rate, what it looks like for next year. And then we come up with a consensus of what we're recommending for operating budget increases for the following year. And then those folks go back to their board and make that presentation and look for approval from their boards so we can all move forward. And Doug asked if we could just do the slides quickly for this group. So I'll go through them. You guys have seen this, many years in a row and are quite familiar with what we're talking about. So, but feel free to stop me if you have any questions, and we'll certainly do questions at the end. And the way we start every year is to talk about how we just ended last year's budget season, which started a year ago now when we were having this meeting. It took us until November when we set the tax rate, and in December when it was certified by the Department of Revenue. As you can see, those are the results from last year's budget, from the hard work last year and the approvals back in May. You can see what the rates were, what the values, and what an average single-family tax bill and what the annual increase was. You'll note that the rates are a little bit less than they were before, and the values continue to go up. Put it in perspective, that average single-family home at $782,000 was $725,000 the year before. So continue to see strong growth in the residential sector. Again, with FY25 finishing up, what were the financial indicators we finished last? We went into this year of FY25 with just over $11 million in stabilization. When we set the tax rate in December, we had an excess capacity of about $14.4 million. That's after we set the tax rate. And we certified free cash this past fall, which is the activity from last budget year ending on June 30th. with a surplus or with a certified free cash of just over $36 million, which was right in line with what we had expected. We've been the last few years sort of ramping up, coming up to this time frame when we have both the Fox Hill and the police station starting, and trying to spend a little bit less in free cash each year so that we would have a nice balance coming into this year. You'll also see that what we'll talk about tonight is there's 4 or 5 articles from free cash transfers for January, some typical that happen every year, annual articles for January, and then one that's an additional article. Those add up to just under 17 million, which carries a balance of going into May town meeting of about 20 million.
So, John, just one thing, go back just one bit. So those numbers that we came up with were based on, especially the levy limit, was based on what new growth percent? Do you know?
That was the actual new growth in last year.
Do you know what the percentage was?
I don't know. I know the dollar amount was about 3.6 million.
Yeah. So was it under, okay.
It was in the twos.
It was under, is it in the twos?
In the twos, yeah.
Yeah, see, that's, okay. It's good.
So budget goals for every year, same as, we sit here every year and we talk about how can we continue to maintain services, how do we prioritize our investments in infrastructure, and, we want to be able to make sure we're adjusting our plan for long-term liabilities like our pension, fully funding our pension on schedule, and our OPEB plan where we fund in our operating budget a specific amount of money that grows by 9.3% each year, and continue to be able to do that, and also to minimize or not have to add new fees or increase fees. Those are kind of the goals we use each year as we're setting the budgets. Some of the assumptions we're using in 26. We're finally back to being able to project some increases in local receipts and state aid. Well, hopefully state aid. Governor's budget came out today, so we'll see how that goes. But local receipts, we'll talk more about it when we get to that slide. But being able, anything we can increase in both those categories helps us with the tax levy. We want to be realistic when we set a goal for our accommodated accounts. For anybody listening, accommodated accounts are what we call our undistributed accounts, or accounts that we take out of one specific budget because they affect all sorts of budgets, things like health insurance. We don't budget in a particular department. We do it in our undistributeds. So we're looking at a projection this year. Usually the high water mark when we're here for you, we're talking about maybe an 8 or a 9. We're not even talking about 7 right now as our goal, and we still got a long way to go with that. But we're at a better starting place than we have been. And then we try to set minimal operating budget increases, again with keeping in mind how can we maintain our services that we have, and how can we continue to do what we do. What puts pressure on this now is collective bargaining agreements, those that have been settled, and on the town side, we don't have any going into next year. All of our collective bargaining agreements are up, so that's going to put quite a bit of pressure on that. And then we always use a range to try to control the growth of the tax levy year over year to be somewhere between 4.5% and 5.5%.
Could we ask a question here, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Back on the other slide you just had up, so you put the accommodated at 7, and you made the comment that we're going into it in better shape than we were last year. What's better?
Well, this time of year, because it's so early in when we're looking at everything. So last year, we didn't have a trash contract at this point last year. We still don't know what health insurance is going to be.
Right.
We don't know what special ed is. So at this time of year at this time of the process, we're typically talking about 8 or 9 as a placeholder of a
Right.
starting point. We're talking about starting that a little bit.
All right, so you have fewer unknowns, you have more knowns. So what are you expecting out of health insurance? Do you have any idea?
Well, we're hoping for between 5 and 6.
Really?
Yeah, which would be great. I mean, we haven't had a double-digit increase in health insurance here.
Probably over 10 years.
Okay.
So Frank, I know you saw the next slide ahead of time.
No, I can hardly read this thing, to be honest with you. If you could make it bigger, it would be great.
That's on the view, Doug, if you want to change the view, but I don't know what that does to BCAT, so I wouldn't risk it. So accommodated accounts, you can, or maybe you can see that, Frank, might be easier if you look at that to me.
Yeah.
So as you can see, it's the normal budget drivers. It's the ones we complain about every year when we're here. It's health insurance, it's debt service, it's the retirement, it's OPEB, and then the biggies, special ed. We just, it's too early, we don't know, and that can be quite volatile. And those are big numbers. So the higher the percentage on those, the bigger the amount it eats up of our. So you see there, interesting to see what the averages have been, the 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year average, keeping in mind the 5 and 10 both have COVID in them, so it does skew them a little bit. But if we're, starting now at 7, and if we can get down a little bit, like I said, last year we were talking about more than 7, maybe 8 this time, and we wound up closer to 5.8. 5.8 is, I think, a good number. That's hopefully what, if we could get down to that, that'd be great. But you can see there what the averages have been. It's still early for accommodated. We got a long way to go. We're going to spend a lot of time on health insurance. The school's going to spend a lot of time on special ed, and those are big numbers. They're both, $18 million. So any big increase percent-wise in those is a big dollar amount.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
What are you assuming in headcount changes, if anything?
On our side, very little.
What about, have you got any input from the schools?
I think it's too early for them to.
Yeah. So you're assuming no headcount changes?
Minimal, if anything. And maybe there's fractions of changes, or there's some decreases and increases that offset.
Okay, thank you.
So operating budgets, just like everybody else, everything costs more at your house the last few years. Heating your house, fuel. For us, water costs have been a thing, but the big thing for us in operating budgets is going to be collective bargaining for both us and the school. The schools already have a contract with their unions, and it's likely that ours will fall in somewhere in line with that. That's sort of how it works. So that's going to be the big driver. Level service is probably somewhere around 4.5% is probably what level services is. You may hear that number again in a few more slides. So that's the expense side. On the revenue side, state aid, the 3 categories of revenues for us is state aid, local receipts, and tax levy. State aid and local receipts for us are a much smaller percent of the budget than in lots of other places. But like I said in the beginning, we're finally seeing some increases in those areas, which is great news for us. Any increase in those areas, as I said, helps us with.
Just on the previous slide, you said that level services was 4.5%. Can you go back to the
Yep.
slide?
So talking about operating budget increase.
Right. So, but level service is 4.5%, but if you look at the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year average, none of those are close to 4.5%. So
I think just the costs have been going up for everything, and then when you factor in personnel.
okay, so we can kind of throw those other averages out because it's a new reality with inflation.
Well, I say the 5 and the 10 include COVID too, so those have a big reduction in 1 year in there that kind of skews it a little bit too, but.
Yeah, so I think the schools department and the Burlington teachers did a great job of working together on a contract, but it's still a larger contract than we've experienced in a long time. So trying to absorb that into the budget will be, a little bit of a challenge for us in the next few years.
What was the number for last year?
I'm sorry, for the percent operating budget increase?
Yeah.
We approved 4.5 at guidelines. It was a little bit less because there were some cuts in the budget, but
Okay,
like 4.47, I think, total.
great, okay. Thanks.
So state aid, we're projecting a typical increase of about around 3%, which will be great if we can get it. Like I said, the governor's budget will come out soon, and that's typically the high water mark. What is that? About a 3% is about an additional $400,000 in revenue for us. We would go from somewhere like 13.5 million to just under 14 million. If that were the case, local receipts projecting, we've pretty much, the trend has continued in the right direction. We've pretty much recovered from COVID in all areas, which has been great. Hotel has recovered better than I ever thought it would. Meals tax is outpacing projections. I think last year was the biggest year we've had. And a big kicker for us the last couple of years has been investment income, with the investment rates being so high, our treasurer being so aggressive in investing the funds, has been great for us. That when our revenues outpace our projections for local receipts, that just turns into free cash. That just closes to free cash at the end of the year. It's one of the benefits of us conservative budgeting local receipts year after year, that if you don't, so A, protect against having any revenue deficits that would then have to be raised on your tax rate the following year. It also is looked highly upon by the rating agencies, and it's best practices from Department of Revenue, et cetera. And then the last.
Excuse me, John, can I ask a quick question? On the hotel tax, I'm a little surprised that it's recovered as well, but how much of that is state rented rooms? I mean, our hotels are fairly full.
Yeah, we don't get the breakdown per address.
The state pays, so if we see a change in how much money the state's willing to pay to rent out entire hotels, we may see a drop back down to something between COVID and pre-COVID, yeah.
And my understanding is that the amount of rooms that have been being rented in that fashion has been maintained fairly consistent over the past several years. So there haven't been any major increases or decreases in that. A similar type number of folks that were received originally.
Okay. Thank you.
So last category of revenues is tax levy, and that's what picks up everything else. So like I said, projecting increases in those other categories help this. Any adjustments to the accommodated accounts will obviously help this. And we'll aim to be within that target range of 4.5% and 5.5% growth year over year. Just a little graph to show that in the first a few columns going left to right, accommodated, assuming that we can hit that 7% number. To us, we think that's the high water mark. And then assuming a operating budget guideline of those different categories, you can see what that results into an increase in revenues, increase in the levy. And then the last column is just what that would result in a tax, an increase in the tax levy year over year. So you'll see that those, at all four of those, we were within that range we aim to at least start in for the year over year tax levy increase. And the administration and the boards from last week, the consensus was to move forward with an operating budget guideline of 4.5% for both the school and the town.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. First, where is the excise tax buried in revenues?
It's local receipts.
Local receipts. So is that holding up? It's a big number, right? It's like $4 million?
Yeah, between 4 and 5 mil.
So that's holding up. Okay, and then the other question I have is the shift. So the percentage increase is just how much you've got to raise the levy to get the rest of the revenue. And it doesn't take into account which is residential and which is commercial. That's just how many more dollars you got to get.
Correct.
And then you do the shift after that.
Correct. The number is the total increase in the
Right.
total levy.
Right. So do you have any feeling what's happening right now with the commercial versus residential ratios?
We don't have any, we just have, I guess, anecdotal experience at this point. We're all reading the newspaper about Oracle being empty.
Half a million square feet.
We maintain having concerns about our empty office buildings. We have a ton of empty office buildings. If you take a drive around town during the workday, there's a lot of empty parking lots out there. As everybody knows, we've been working over the past couple of years to come up with a plan to try to keep the commercial district vibrant. I know it's going to town meeting on Monday, so give that some consideration. But we really do have some concerns. I mean, the residential is doing extremely well, as we all know, and we really want those two categories, commercial and residential, to rise together. That helps us to be able to maintain the shift, and we do have concerns about the commercial sector. We made some pretty good moves into the life science. I think we're poised to take advantage of the next, venture capital investments into the life science industry. There's a building that we thought was a go, that was broken off from the Marriott hotel parcel there over in the corner. That's been sort of put on hold. We had sort of expected to see a building permit on that now. I have the building inspector in my office on a regular basis, and unfortunately, there is nothing of major going on in town. So we do have a lot of the residential stuff that, many towns would be envious of, but our bread and butter in that area is, new buildings, entire buildings, or major projects. So there is absolutely nothing of substantial nature even being talked about being done in town for the first time in a long time. I know Frank referenced we had a very strong new growth number, 3.6 million. That is directly the result of about half of the value being added for the two labs up on Blue Sky, formerly Network Drive, so the Broad Institute and Vericel. And our assessors left about half of that value on the table, so we do believe that we should have a decent new growth number for next year, this upcoming year as well. But again, we really don't have anything in the pipeline after that.
So I really didn't mean to put you on the spot to go into detail. We all know that the commercial side is holding off by and large, right? So all I'm trying to figure out is, for the next 24 months, no matter what we do with zoning and anything else, it takes years for these things to make a difference. So we've already had the residential side grow faster than the commercial side. So we must have some of the shift must be changing, right?
Well, like I say, we did have a little bit of flexibility on the shift. We've never shifted to the max, but that is also, we've been eating into that little reserve as we move forward as well.
Oh, I see. So that's how you offset it. You move their percentage up till you hit the max.
It's a little bit of shift more as the values adjust. And again, that's always been a lever that we've used. We typically shifted what they call 167, and the max we can do is a 175.
Right.
And like I say, we've been moving closer to the 175 over the past several years. I guess one takeaway is I would just suggest to you that, historically, these guidelines are similar to what we worked with last year, and I think that we could probably expect, at least for this upcoming year, to have a similar impact on the residents' tax rate, somewhere within that range. I wouldn't expect it to vary too wildly from what we experienced this past year.
Any other questions? No? So we usually accept the recommendation, is that true? Historically, we would do a vote to,
Yeah, historically.
yeah. We have a motion.
Question. So in the budget meeting, who was, Ways and Means was part of that discussion?
Yeah.
And how does it go? Does the town come in with a proposed number, and then it's discussed and kind of negotiated back and forth?
The town comes in with a recommendation with all of these slides and with this. The schools say, I think we can do 4.5% again, which schools were a little more comfortable with 4.5% this year than last year because This year, they have bus contracts negotiated, they have their union contracts all negotiated. Last year, they didn't have a bus. I think last year, they didn't have a transportation. They weren't sure there. So the big unknown is special ed. But that's accommodated, so that's the big shift. There's not there's not a significant amount of negotiating. 85 or 87% of our budget is personnel.
Right.
And those are, collective bargaining, so.
And just to break even, or just to keep level with the collective bargaining, there's the annual increases, there's longevity increases, and all that adds up to 4% or something, like what does that come in at?
I don't have the exact number, but it eats, just that alone eats into, so what we're going to carry in negotiated settlements when we come to you in a month or so is probably close to $1 million. That would be wage adjustments. The steps and longevity and all that changes are already baked into what we have before that. So I don't know if that doesn't really answer your question, but.
Well, I guess, so most of the contracts are, what are the increases negotiated?
We don't have any contracts going.
Well, like for the last year, though, isn't it like a 3% or 3.5%?
Yeah, the last 3-year contract was like 2.5 with some other minor changes mixed in with it.
Just along those lines, when you add the steps into the COLA, if I recall correctly, I think it ended up being sort of 5-ish. If you look at the budget, personnel budget from year to year, and since the headcount hasn't changed, the total is roughly 5% more when all that stuff is factored in. So, because I remember last year, the guideline is 4.5 last year, as I recall.
Yep.
So last year was the same thing, that basically the personnel costs were slightly higher than what the guideline is, which means you're actually eating into the non-personnel budget in order to make the guideline. I think it's essentially the same idea this year.
And it's about 5% is a good estimate because that's what we use when we increase our Medicare budget, which is based off of your total payroll. We increase about 5% each year.
So you're eating into like materials and supplies, like what do you?
Just making adjustments, along the way. Something we had to do last year doesn't need to be done this year, and just department by department trying to balance the whole thing out.
Frank?
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have questions. I want to speak to, what I think of this proposal. We're all somewhat concerned what we might be faced with, say, 2-3 years out. And it's going to have everything to do with the shift of the revenue to the residential side, which will make those constituents, those payers pay more. But the truth is that Burlington is still a growth community. The problem is that it's becoming more and more dominated by housing, a lot of residential growth. I think we're doing like 30 new houses a year, something like that, big ones. So I don't see any reason to not support this, especially if we can keep the accommodated in the 7% area. That's terrific. And if we can keep the health insurance in the, I think you said 5 or 6, that's eminently supportable with this kind of with this type of increase, and not do anything more dramatic. Someday, the day may come when the picture won't be so good, and we'll have to find ways to either spend less or get the revenues in other ways. And we've had some ideas about that. I don't want to go into it here, but there's things you can do with water rates and other kinds of revenue from taxes that aren't directly the levy operating budget. You could do those things and maintain your services. We don't want to get into, chopping the hell out of a good thing. I think this budget looks quite solid based on the predictions that we have for the next 12 to 18 months, and I would support it. we do have to start thinking about the what-ifs a little bit more going forward. And I know it's got everything to do with other forms of revenue or getting the commercial side to become stronger. It has everything to do with debt exclusions for the levy limit, but that doesn't help you with how much the taxpayers have to pay. You got, debt exclusions or not, but the revenue from the taxes is the revenue from the taxes. The only way you can make it less is with alternative sources and or spend less. Right now, this looks to me to be okay. I think it's a good plan. And I would support it.
Motion, any other questions, Mike?
So I'm just thinking about the commercial side and kind of the weakness on the commercial side, Paul. As you said, this year was like kind of the worst year you've seen. The previous 3 or 4 years, I would have thought would have been pretty bad too. So what is it that's making this year worse? Is it just leases coming up and companies not renewing, or why is this year worse than the last
What
two
we're hearing on the leases is the right sizing, and I think that we had long-term leases in place prior to COVID, and I think we had really quality landlords and quality tenants, so when people closed down their offices, they continued to pay their leases. And then we knew that the problem would come 5 to 7 years down the road when they go to renew their leases. And, I think a trend that we're seeing is not necessarily people abandoning their offices, but maybe just taking less space and right-sizing it, maybe to sort of fit a hybrid model where, half the employees are in on certain days and the other half are in on the other days. So a shrinkage in that area. Again, I think during COVID, we had a major renovation going on at the mall. So we still had some things that were in the planning before COVID hit that were, continued through COVID. And again, when I say it's more of a discussion with the building department, oftentimes if people are planning a project, they'll stop by to try to get information. So we'll sort of have a little bit of advance notice, and that's really dried up significantly. And again, the timing of, my understanding is the venture capital sort of slowed down in the life sciences industry. I do think that we're poised to attract some of that business when that funding sort of frees up in the future years. But our understanding is that that's pretty slow right now as well. So a lot of factors happening, sort of converging at once. But again, during the COVID years, that we were still working off of projects that had been previously planned and permitted that sort of continued on, while the pandemic was in effect.
And this would be, we'd see this regionally, not just Burlington, it would be other towns in the Boston area.
Absolutely. Anybody that has a significant commercial base, Burlington or Waltham, Lexington, Woburn.
Okay, yeah. All right, thanks.
Move to accept? If that's the right terminology?
I believe so.
Second.
Second.
Unless you want
Just to be clear, we're moving to accept the recommendation of 4.5% operating, 7% accommodated?
Yes.
Okay, I think that we are all here, nobody's online, so we can just do a all in favor. All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, abstain, thank you. I'm not as fast at this as Eiler was. All right. So should be 13-0. Perfect. 13-0-0. Next up, we're going to move into the warrant articles now. So Article 11, Town Hall 1. David, do you have that?
Sure, I believe also Town Hall 2 looked at this as well, but
Okay.
we can go over it. This is a authorization for a 5-year contract for the cybersecurity technology infrastructure. This is a line item that you see on the the operating budget each year. What they're asking for here is the ability to negotiate for 5 years. Anything over 3 years, Mass General Law requires that that be a town meeting approved. So this is not a funding of a specific dollar amount. We'll see that dollar amount when the operating budget hits, but they want the ability to negotiate. We've already had 2 contracts. The second one is now ready to expire, and we need to start with our next third one. So it's really just giving them the authorization for 5-year negotiations. We'll see the numbers when the operating budget's here. Our subcommittee voted 2-0.
So are these, just so I'm clear on the 5-year contract that we're negotiating, is this consulting fees? I noticed it said lease/purchase agreements. What's it actually covering?
Yeah, so it's, well, yeah, when it's,
It's basically the technology, hardware and software refresh for the entire town.
So
it's,
licenses?
yep, and all the equipment.
Okay.
And install, everything.
Okay. Thank you.
My understanding was it's 3 years right now, is that right? It's a 3-year contract that's
No,
expired?
we're currently in the last year of a 5-year from the
it is?
last time we did this.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
So right now, they're negotiating and putting the plan together for what we're going to purchase this summer and install, over the next whatever
So it's a
year.
renewal of a 5-year, an existing 5-year,
It would be to do a new 5-year,
Right,
yes.
right.
And one would be expiring. We would
same term as the
Yeah.
current? Okay, thank you.
not finally negotiating yet, but that would come.
Right.
When we come in May and submit the operating budget, which is where this is paid from, we would have those details by then. This just, getting the approval early, just make sure when they do negotiate the number, when we come in May, we know that that's it, nothing's going to change. And if we were to come in May and not get a 5-year approval, we would have to go back to the drawing board, because now we wouldn't have enough in the operating budget to cover if we had to pay for it over 3 years or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I just wanted, one more question. So is this the kind of contract, do you have to pay for a lot of the licenses up front, or you get to pay for them over the 5-year period?
I think it can vary, but that'd probably be better for question for when we come with the technology group, because they'll have the whole layout about exactly how many switches we're buying,
Yep.
How many, another firewall, how many APs, how much of the telephony gear. That they'll have all that spelled out in the, they'll have actual quotes and a whole plan
Right.
together.
Yeah, so we can only do a 3-year contract without town meeting approval. So this is really just asking town meeting's permission to allow us to negotiate a 5-year deal.
Right, understood.
And then we'll be back in May with the actual lease terms and the equipment and all that good stuff.
I think you could ask your question on what would happen in the last 5-year contract.
So I know sometimes when you have these contracts, you have to pay for like all the licenses up front, which means part of the cost is hitting next year's budget, but then there's a part that's actually a prepaid expense. That's what I was more curious about, if you have to pay for a lot of those costs up front, but you don't have to amortize them all in next year's budget.
My recollection is just that it shows up in the budget every year for the same amount for 5
Okay,
years.
okay, that's good.
So we wind up spending, say like $2 million, and then paying it back $400,000 a year.
Yep, got it.
Likely it'll be more this time, but
And this vote is just to approve the 5-year contract.
5 years.
It's not the content
Right.
of the
Correct.
contract, it's
Right.
just the
Correct.
approving the
Term.
duration of the contract.
Correct.
Paul, Town Hall 2 reviewed it. Any input or update? Did Town Hall 2? Okay.
Move to approve?
I have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Perfect. So Article 13, transfer from free cash to Ways and Means Reserve Fund. This is a $100,000 expenditure or transfer. David?
That sounds good. Yes, so this is a transfer from free cash to our Ways and Means Reserve Fund. Typically, we budget at the start of the budget season $200,000 to go into our emergency fund. And then we generally augment it with another $100,000 once free cash is certified, and any, possibly any expenses that we've taken out of it. again, this is a fund that we have control over, which allows us to appropriate certain expenditures out of it without needing to call a special town meeting and pay for those costs as it's normally done. We very seldom use it. Last time I think we used it was in 2021 with an HVAC issue. Nothing has been expended. Any funds that are not used are returned to free cash at the end of the year, and it's built again. Since I've been on the committee, this is in the amounts that we're comfortable having, knowing that if we have a major expenditure, we have the ability to act on it as a group here. Our subcommittee voted 2-0.
Right, and just for the new members or anybody watching, also, people ask me, I got asked this morning, why do you start with 100,000, with 200,000, 100? There's some thought that earlier in the budget year, there would be money unencumbered in several budgets that you could use maybe and then pay it back with a warrant article in January. But now, as we start to get to the end of the year, some of those budgets are most of that money's encumbered, and so we bump it up a little just to be able to cover a little bit more without having to have a special meeting. Is that true?
I'd say that that's true. And again, I think the reason why we've been fortunate not to have to use it quite as much is, most towns have a fall and a spring town meeting, and we are kind of unique in that we have 3 a year. So we're never really 3 months away from the ability to ask town meeting for the money. But, within that 3-month time frame, there could be an emergency. We have had some over the years.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should know the answer to this, but I'm curious. The 200 that we appropriate in May, that starts us off, is that out of the operating budget? It is. So the difference here, I think that's pretty fundamental. The difference here is, in the beginning, we just put enough money in there that you got something to work with, but it's coming out of the levy. When we get into January, if you've got the free cash to work with and you want to make it bigger, just to have a little bit more assurance, you can do that, and it doesn't affect the levy at all. And furthermore, if you don't spend it, the whole thing closes out to free cash at the end of the fiscal year. And that's, I think, the motivation to break it up that way is that we ask for kind of a minimum amount out of the operating budget, and we augment it if we can. Here we are.
Any other questions? Motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
All in favor? Opposed? 13-0-0. Article, I guess we're Article 15, the Tax Abatement Defense Fund.
Sounds good. So this is a transfer, and we met with Paul, and Paul is here, I'm sure, to answer any questions that we have on this. Our assessor. This is a transfer from our town's overlay account, the amount of $250 to be put into our tax abatement defense fund. The town uses resources in this fund to defend our tax valuations when cases are brought up before the tax appellate boards. People file abatements, and we have to go and defend our values. The town has been very successful in defending our values, and it's imperative, especially in today's market, that we continue to defend these values to the best of our ability. In the past, we've also used special warrants for specific cases, most recently being the Macy's case, where we had a specific case against it, and we raised money for that. This is our overall general tax abatement defense fund that we're putting money into. Our overlay surplus right now currently stands about $6 million. And each year, about $1 million of our tax revenue goes into it. Once we clear a certain point, the board's assessor, Paul, they may release funds out of that, and that goes into a general fund, or it pays for a specific equipment. So far, we haven't seen any upticks. We talked about abatements and how they're looking, and right now we haven't seen an uptick, but this is when they may start coming in and notice this and what's there, but we have to be prepared. So our subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor to support this. And again, it's being declared a surplus out of the overlays, out of the overlay accounts to fund into the defense fund.
Any questions about this one? No?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, in the warrant, it just says transfer from available funds. Is it,
The motion will clarify that it's
okay,
coming from.
I was going to say, it seems kind of vague, yeah.
Yeah, you know,
All right.
you see that a lot in Mays because at that point, we don't know what the
Okay.
funding source is, but the motion clarifies that it's coming from overlay.
Got it, great, thank you.
Move to approve?
Second.
In favor? Opposed? 1300.
Thanks.
The next is the transfer from free cash to previously approved capital project funds. This also kind of ties into the free cash plan that was item 7 on the agenda. So David, you want to
Go through that? Sure. So this is an article to transfer from free cash to previously approved capital projects, an amount that totals $14,800,000. Again, as John went through his slides, free cash was certified at just over $36 million. The approach of utilizing free cash for capital projects shows the town's commitment to fiscal responsibility and prudent financial management. Free cash has certainly been increasing over the last few years, and we knew we had a number of larger capital projects that were coming on the books within a short period of time, and the utilization of free cash was going to be something that would be needed. Over the past decade, we've been able to keep roughly $30 million off of our budget, off of our debt schedule, by the utilization of this model exactly. The warrant article is written. There are 4 projects that are being requested to be funded via the free cash. First one was is $3.5 million for roads and sidewalks. This is something that's looked at every other year through the group. It's improvements to our roads and sidewalks. And we historically have been able to fund this utilizing the free cash model. So this is our every other year that's coming due. We're going to have that for the $3.5 million. The Overlook Park project that was approved at the last town meeting for $1.3 million. This is a $2.3 million project. The town did receive a grant for $1 million, and our responsibility on that project, as it sits, was $1.3 million. So utilizing free cash for that. We then also have the Fox Hill project and the police station project, each looking to utilize $5 million of free cash on each for a total of 10. In April, we're going to be needing to start with bans on those projects in order to start the funding of those. And that's before the May town meeting and appropriating it at that point. Utilizing it now and paying and having that money available means that we don't have to, again, work on the bans for this coming year. Again, that's going to keep $10 million off of the bond schedule for this year or for coming into next year. Certainly will save a significant amount of money. So again, $14 million of our free cash of $36 million to be used. We've also had some other items that we've talked about that are also using free cash. So with all of that cash being used, it's going to bring just over $19 million available for the May town meeting warrants. And we feel that this is a very healthy amount to be going into a budget season. So subcommittee voted 2-0 to support the idea of utilizing free cash for these projects.
Doug, can I just add one thing real quick?
Sure.
Is that none of these are new. All of these have been previously approved. This request is to just save us from having, like David said, saving us from having to issue any bans or bonds on these projects. It's just funding two projects in their entirety and 2 projects on what we would have needed to borrow this current year. So again, nothing new, no new authorizations here.
Fine point on the Overlook Park allocation, you said the project was 2.3 million, we're setting aside 1.3 from free cash. The grant they got was 1 million. However, as I understand it, the grant is paid only after the project is done. So my question is, do we have the 2.3 million to actually spend on the project?
So the way the reimbursable grant works is you can submit as you spend the money.
Okay.
So I think Kelly was going to check, but I think they can submit quarterly for reimbursements. So it may work out cash-wise where we get back enough as we spend down our our $1.3 million. We're getting reimbursements enough that outpaces when we have to use the cash.
All right. I'm assuming you've got enough float to cover whatever the 3-month reimbursement cycle is, so good.
Yeah, it's a cash flow, situation. So we'll monitor it closely, and by the end of June 30th, we always have to cover it in some way, shape, or form. So
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I should have asked this in the subcommittee meeting, but talking with Deb actually made me think of it. We haven't really had articles like this particularly in the past. We've used it when the warrants are when the warrant articles are passed for these things. They generally say it can be borrowing or other sources and so on. So is the reason we have to do it for this because we're crossing a fiscal year boundary with the free cash, or why is it that we need to vote on this? I guess what I'm wondering. When it seems like we haven't in the past.
Well, we haven't typically done it in January. We've done it many times at May town meeting, and the reason that we have in the past approved the project, and when we approved it for borrowing, and then came back and said, oh, to keep this off the borrowing schedule, we're going to use free cash for it. But the reason that we're doing it now is because we're coming up to a point where we're going to have to either issue a ban because we're going to spend money on these 4 projects, or are spending money this fiscal year, and we have to close the fiscal year. You can't close the fiscal year with a deficit in the funds. So if this didn't get approved, or we didn't request to use free cash for these, we'd end up having to issue bans.
Did the original warrant article not allow it to be taken from free cash as a potential funding source?
No, they were approved as bond.
It only said borrow.
The motion is to approve as borrow.
Oh, okay. If the article said borrow or free cash, would that have given you the
we have to
flexibility?
specify at town meeting.
You're not allowed to have it. No ors are allowed. Okay.
I think what's a little different is we've typically done it in May.
It's more the timing,
Before we
yeah.
started spending funds on the particular projects.
Right.
What's a little bit different about this is these projects are sort of in motion right now. So
Okay.
just a slight
Yep.
variation, different town meeting and a different time in the cash flow process, but same result.
Thanks.
And then if I'm not mistaken, the projects as approved were for $100 million a piece, so they weren't broken out. This just happens to represent the amount of the ban we would need to take for this coming year, and so it wasn't wasn't the $5 million.
And I think it over the last couple of years, in the lead up for Fox Hill and the police station, there was a lot of talk of, you've got this pile of free cash, how come you're not just putting some of that towards it? And we're going to, but
When the moment's right.
it comes when our borrowing plan hits.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, John, the answer for you is we took a 2/3 vote to borrow, and I don't think we can just then swap in free cash legitimately. But I think we need, through maybe how you put it on the floor, Mr. Chairman, or how you guys put it on the floor as an article, we need to kind of reinforce and clarify the role of free cash in our in our management of money and what we're trying to do with the free cash. I think town meeting has really been perpetually lost on what we're trying to do with free cash and why we hold so much of it. And this is like the most perfect example on earth. This avoids a lot of interest. And in fact, if we wanted to avoid more interest and we elected to do it, we could even put more free cash in here. But if you haven't got the free cash, you lose that option. And in some cases, it could really penalize you. I wish we could get it across the town meeting somehow, the benefit of having the free cash, building it, and using it very judiciously. And there's no better use of it that I can think of than either to buy something you could never buy any other way, like you couldn't finance it, or to get rid of debt. I mean, debt's the killer for us, right? That's really what our problem is going to be in about 4 years. So I'd like to see that kind of lectured into why we're doing this.
Yeah, I think John had some pretty good statistics on what this particular move would actually save us, John.
Yeah, so it's just that 10 million alone. If we assume 25 and 5, so a term of 25 years and 5%, we'd annually have to spend about $710,000 for 25 years,
Right.
which is 17.7 million.
They
We're going
need
to spend
to
10.
understand that so that we stop getting whipsawed about why don't we just spend free cash and go buy a helicopter? It's just nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about the potential savings on just that 10 million
Yeah.
between 5 and 7.7 million.
Yeah, I'm just, I'm a little tired of feeling like I'm fighting an avalanche if you don't get it at town meetings. And I think it's time to educate them, and this is a good example, if you could do it. Thank you.
Point taken. Good suggestion. Anybody else? All right.
We're doing a good suggestion. I think one of the problems that took me a while, just the name free cash, is where people get stuck and hung up on. Because free cash has the association that we can use for anything, and in these meetings, we go very in depth and what it's for and how we use it. And I think that's part of what continues to be lost.
You actually can use it for anything. The point is, we want to use it smart. And one of the smartest things you can do is not have debt. It's just not a hard concept, but it seems to really get lost.
It's kind of funny, the state definition starts with, first of all, it's not free and it's not cash, so.
But we're going to call it that anyway, just to make it more fun.
Unencumbered tax revenues.
Unreserved fund balance is the
Unreserved
technical
fund
name.
balance, I guess is the.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frank, when you give your explanation at the town meeting in May about how this works, a good way to explain it is kind of like when you borrow money to buy a car or a house. Put down 10% on a house, you're going to be paying a lot more interest than what you loan. Put down 20%, yeah, it gives you a hit in your cash, but it
Yeah,
lowers
I
your
agree.
payment and you add your interest and
Right.
you
So,
become better off in the long run.
personalize it to the way they live their life. The other point that goes with that is we've got a lot of borrowing that's coming up that's really atypical. I mean, we are in a very, I've never seen this kind of a lineup of projects. And I've been on Ways and Means, you have too, a long time. We've really got a big lineup here. And so managing the cash to keep the debt down, managing the available funds that aren't encumbered already really helps us out. So, yeah, that's a good way to put it, and the motivation for it is we're buying more houses than we usually do.
Yeah. Our houses are more expensive. Anything else?
Motion to approve?
Second?
All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? 1300. Article 12, transfer from free cash to water stabilization fund. Roger?
Right. Golly, blanking out here. John and I met with Brian White of the DPW to talk about this transfer from free cash to the Water Stabilization Fund of $1.767862. So the water bills go out, people pay their water bills, money from the water bills goes into the general fund. By state law, Several years ago, we were anticipating the MWRA expenses ramping up, being almost where we are. John could probably do a better job than I, but let me try this. So a plan was put in place to increase the rates and setting aside the money in the stabilization fund of originally of 6.8%. During COVID, the water revenues started to fall off, and a change in the rate was up to 9.8%. So there's a cute chart that goes with this. But anyway, this money, we were going to fall behind in terms of the expectations of funding the stabilization fund, so the rate was increased. This money gets put into the stabilization fund from free cash at this time of year. In May, there will be a similar transfer from the water stabilization fund into the operating budget to cover operations for water.
Annual
Is there anything,
article,
John?
last 7 years. It's our mechanism in order to capture those rate increased revenues and use them over an extended period of time rather than have them close to free cash or be gone as one time. So hopefully, over the next couple of years, we'll have finished all of that borrowing and adding all the expenses for the MWRA connection project, and we will just increase the revenues in the general fund and increase all the expenses, and we won't have to do this close to free cash, come back. But we're still, because we haven't finished borrowing, there's still going to be a lag in those. So we're getting there.
It's a little bit of a convoluted process, but if you recall, the MWRA project, we really wanted to be transparent about the rate increases and, where the money was going to fund, which part of the rate increases were to fund the MWRA project, which at the time, was not a slam dunk project at town meeting. So we wanted to be able to keep that accounting separate. It's caused us a couple of extra articles at town meeting. Within a year or two, as John indicated, once we have all the borrowing down, eventually this all folds in and just becomes the water operation. But for now, we just wanted to sort of maintain that transparency, that we're keeping track of what portion of the rate increases were to pay for the project and sort of matching it up with the MWRA expenses.
Yeah. And I left out the piece, the subcommittee voted 2-0 to support it.
Excellent.
John, did you have anything to add?
No, that was excellent.
Two other small notes while we were talking to Brian White. So the MWA connection project is not quite done. There's a stretch of pipe up Middlesex Turnpike that will be done. He said the design work is in process and it should be done maybe by the end of the year, which will up our daily volume to the max where it's supposed to be.
Daily capacity.
The daily capacity, right. And the other thing that's going on in the Vinebrook treatment plant, the water operations are being decommissioned as part of this same MWRA connection project being overseen by the state. And they're doing that in connection with the police station about to refit, put the temporary police station in there. So just a couple of other notes. So it's 1.767862 transferred from free cash to water stabilization.
Motion to approve that.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
And, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
related to this is sort of a unpaid political announcement.
It'll cost you.
We've had conversation off and on about not subsidizing our water delivery, but fully charging for it. And one way to get that is through some kind of an enterprise fund or something like that. So we've talked about this off and on, and I think the administration has a lot of work to do to put that together. But I'd like to be the committee to be aware that it's something that I feel, I think you're pretty much in favor of it, but it takes a lot of legwork, and the selectmen obviously play a huge role in this. But I really do think we want to continue to pursue fully paying for everything that it takes to deliver water to everybody, commercial and residential, in a way that the costs are reflected in the charges. And you do that through probably an enterprise fund, but they'll figure that out. And some and I think we're closer, but I think we're subsidizing a lot. And if you look forward to, protecting your operating budget or managing your costs or paying fully for everything from who uses it, I think this is the perfect candidate to charge fully for the use of the water for the people that use it as they use it and not spread it around. And it gets it out of the operating budget. So I really would like to see us do that.
I did neglect, we did talk to, John raised the issue in the subcommittee with DPW about that.
Was he as nice about it?
So we're specifically putting together a spreadsheet to gather all the data on where's the revenue coming from, where's it going, what are our costs from WRA versus Mill Pond, because I know you like that one.
Love it.
Yeah, what's the residential versus commercial burden? So we're getting a spreadsheet together to collect all that data so that we can then decide what to do with it.
Okay, so it's a project that we should keep working at.
Yes.
I think we want to get there. I think we're going to be glad when we do. Thank you.
Right, just looking, I mean, we're moving toward the capital plan update in a minute, and that was a wish list, but there are a few expenditures out there for Mill Pond just to keep it running also, so it is important to know what it's costing us, and as we look at what's the value. All right, did we vote on that? Yes. So Article 14, authorize the Transportation Infrastructure Fund. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an annual authorization. The state collects 20 cents of every ride share. The state, Uber's in your list, they keep 10 cents of that, and the municipality where that ride originated gets 10 cents. Burlington alone, last year, we had 340,930 rides originating in Burlington. So 10 cents of that, we get $34,093. There's restrictions on how this money can be allocated. We are going to put it towards the transportation, formerly the B-line. Last year alone, I think we had over 20,000 rides in Burlington. The last 6 months, we've had close to 2,000 on average per month. So this is a healthy way to assist people that use our ride-sharing program. The way it works in town is whoever calls for a ride pays the first dollar. We pay the next 8, I believe. 9.
10.
We pay the next 10. We pay the next 10. And after that, whatever costs the person that reserves the ride is on for. The operating budget allocates $100,000 to this revolving account. This $34,000 will be added to it, and what we have in there will retain. The last 12 months, I think it's been $188,000 in actual ride-sharing costs. So this will help to offset that. I think this is way under what we funded for the B-line in the past. The subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor.
Any questions about this?
Motion to approve. It's a great program.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Okay. So, moving on, we talked about free cash. Is there more to talk about free cash, Town Hall 1? From more just of a planning and...
Mind if I jump in?
Sure.
I would say we should just, we're going to review free cash again going into May town meeting, and I think we can take a look at the residual that's there, what we want to use it for, what will be left behind, and give another lecture on the wonders of free cash. So I don't think there's more to talk about tonight. I don't have anything else.
I should have anticipated we would have talked about it with that article, but I knew we wanted to cover it. it and have a discussion, so.
Is it worth mentioning the allocations for pay-as-you-go program at this point, or should that come up in May?
Yeah, I think we'll get to that in, in a couple of months.
That's fine.
Right, we should do the whole thing then as part of the May preparation, I would say, project.
All right. I just know that all the departments are going to be putting forth their lists of...
They are, and they have a rough draft of that, but I didn't want to get ahead of them and do it twice.
Great.
Okay?
All good? Ed?
So I just want to express my support for making the plug. I think Paul had a great idea to restrict the discussion to the example before us and just say this, we're using this as a down payment on a mortgage. It's a good idea, and we could broaden that discussion in May. And to clarify, are we nominating someone to give that talk, or are we directing the administration to do that?
Honestly, you didn't listen to what I said when Frank gives his
Frank, I did hear that. I was being kind of
Lost.
He didn't seem to respond.
But I'll probably lose my temper in a hurry, so I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
I'm perfectly glad to talk about it, but I think, the chairman's going to put these articles on the floor, so it's your decision, Doug.
Okay.
All right?
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, whatever you want me to do, I'll be glad to do, or one of these guys. But we really do need to do it.
Capital plan update. Town Hall 1, John?
So I think, Frank, I don't know if you want me to start, but
Yeah, I do.
so
An eye chart.
the capital process has been evolving the last few years, which has changed even right up into the floor of town meeting a few times. So I think what we did was we shared with the Town Hall 1 and a few others the list of capital requests, which typically this group wouldn't see. It would already have been vetted. It would have been, we would have slotted stuff. We would have told people this, this stuff isn't happening this year. This is beyond any resources or the priorities that we have. But I think for the exercise was to share that we asked everybody to submit their request and slot which year they wanted it. Every department, and in the list also includes a potential Shawsheen, a number for Shawsheen. We don't know what that would be yet, but presumably it's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're going to owe at least 10% of that. So that has a place on it. We have a placeholder that was given to us for the high school, and it goes out 10 years. So it includes all that stuff, and it includes over $500 million worth of requests, which is kind of what we expected, and doesn't shock any of us because we see it every year. We just go a few more steps ahead of that. But I think with the feeling that some of the projects started to stack up against each other and that the cost of the projects have now skyrocketed to a point that these projects don't just nicely fit into our every year increases of our budget, and at some point we could have capacity issues, this group wanted to do a little bit more and get some more eyeballs on the capital requests. I actually only went to the Town Hall 1 group, but I can, if everybody promises not to realize it's a draft and not panic right away, I'll share it with everybody. But again, before we talk about it any further, I just want to say, all it is a list of projects that were requested. It has not been vetted. It is not a capital plan. It doesn't mean that any of them are approved or even being asked for approval.
3 helicopters are on there.
So I think that group, been quite a while, probably for a year now, has been working on, can we make a tool that incorporates all the different projection models and tools that we use. Is there a simple tool we can use that will help Ways and Means at least to be able to look forward and say, okay, given an assumption on new growth, given an assumption on operating budgets, given an assumption on growth accommodated, and then where are we with excess capacity? Where are we with our debt ratios, and then now as we layer in some debt, how does that affect that stuff? So it's not much different than what we were doing last year. Both Ed and John had a version of it saying what the effect after we layer in, or after the two projects, the Fox Hill and the police station, are fully baked into our budget, what does that do to our excess capacity? And we agreed that somewhere between 5 and 10 years, we had an issue. If nothing else changed, given a more pessimistic growth assumption versus a more optimistic, maybe it's 10 years. So this tool isn't really much different than that. And we're trying to make strides to be able to plan a little bit better for the bigger projects. I mean, planning isn't going to help for the high school. It's going to cost, $300 million, which is $21 million annually. That doesn't fit in any models we have. So that's a little bit different than, but there are plenty of other projects on that list. There's a field study that's out, so there's fields on there. There's a rec field study that just came out. They have playgrounds and parks and tennis courts and basketball courts and all that stuff on there. So one benefit of it is there's a more comprehensive list than there has been. But one of the downfalls is we don't have a way to fund all those things in the year that they're requesting.
And I think you've done a great job on this, by the way. I think the change in thinking has been, in the past, we've sort of had, I won't put it, in some ways we've had, because of free cash and so on, we've had money to burn, so to speak. Not that we really did. But I think people saw that we had money in the reserve and various projects could be proposed, and as long as they weren't insane, it would generally work out. And the difference now is we go with new high school, new Shawsheen, police station, Fox Hill. It all clearly adds up to more than anything they would comfortably ever fit in. And so I think the nice thing that John has pivoted to with this is that we're shifting from a project-driven budget, so to speak, to here's an amount of money that we can comfortably fit in and keep our debt at a percentage of the levy/operating budget that we want to have. Now, let's figure out which projects fit within that budget. And so it sort of flipped it on its head. And I think this is a really nice way of highlighting that. It's like, okay, look, this is how many millions there are. If you want to make project X, then tell us which project is more important than that we can cancel so that we fit within the total. It's no longer, well, let's just add this in, we'll shoehorn it in somehow. So I think this tool really is going to help drive that home and will be good for Frank's talk with town meeting. When he's describing this, he can...
The moderator and I are going to be...
It'll be much easier to highlight. It's like, okay, town meeting, stop being whimsical and throwing a new project on the floor here and expecting to jam it through because you brought small kids with you. It's now, you have to be responsible. Tell us which project is less important than this project and has fewer children that will die, when you don't do it. So I think it's very good for driving that conversation. So thanks for driving it that way. I think that's a great take.
I think one thing I whined about quite a bit in the subcommittee meeting was, I think this tool more shows us what the max we can, what our total capacity is, but it isn't a guide to.
We don't have to spend it all, yes.
Is this tool a spreadsheet, or what is it?
Yeah.
Was that sent to everyone?
I think it was just the,
Oh, okay.
just that
Usual
Gang of
suspects?
five, yeah.
just a group.
So
Yeah, it'd probably be worth distributing that.
I can share it with you.
I think you need to.
So
And it still needs work, obviously, but yeah,
So the idea, Mike, I don't know if you can even see that, but
Okay.
the idea is to create some thumbnails at the top that, with changing some assumptions, basically, new growth or operating. So if we were going to say new growth instead of what the conservative estimate of 1.5% is 1.75, it'll change our thumbnails to show that instead of running out of capacity in 5 years here in 2029, now we've actually gained a couple years just by that, assuming an extra quarter of a point on that, or vice versa, if you were to curb spending by a quarter of a point, it'll do the same. And again, it's just a simple tool, so it's just taking those assumptions and then just calculating it out. And again, for debt service, what we were doing was to say, okay, what's the highest capacity we would have to run out of, or what could we do over the next 5 years, presumably, and what would that effect be? So we kind of built in that it would assume that you could absorb something like an $8 to $10 million bond annually, plus whatever was coming off bond payments. So it still has some work to do with that. There's a different tool we use for the capital and how that makes it into the debt plan, but that's again, you need to make assumptions with that. So if you put once you start putting projects into that, it becomes real. So we just kind of want to use a dollar amount to say, okay, this is sort of the capacity we have in that.
So this is, this is an update, and I haven't studied it in detail, but it's an update to what we started with nearly 2 years ago to get a sense of how Fox Hill and the police station fit in, and just given how the numbers work out, I see those projects that are approved are built in now, and we get about the result that we projected when we showed town meeting what the result would be on our capacity if we build in those two projects. And what we typically do is a real bottoms up. We build the budget. This is the top down, so it's very macro, which I think we've coaxed administration to put together, because to do that very top down, you have to make very gross assumptions, which could end up wrong. And so those assumptions are these macro features of what the average growth is in revenues, in new growth in town, in our budget growth, and allows us to just look at scenarios and see what's going to be prudent over a long term. And I think it's one perspective we need to take when we certainly have enough projects being proposed from the bottom up to overwhelm our overall capacity in that big picture.
I think like any long-term financial forecasting, it takes into account a lot of assumptions, and then every year as you have more data, you update them and see how we did.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, I want to thank everyone. Along the way, you and John, and now you've done a lot. You guys are sort of doing this in the back boiler room for years anyway, but we've pulled it together in a way that it's a structured tool that, you can press buttons and see what happens, and you can either test your assumptions or you can replace your assumptions with new known data, new better facts, and see where you're at. I have one question, which is where do we go next with this? But don't answer that quite yet. I think this tool gives us a way to triangulate on two critical things: the levy limit and total taxation. And they're not exactly the same thing, right? They're just not. So the levy limit you can protect with exclusions if a lot of the drive is coming out of debt that's excludable, right? And so you can see what's going on there. What you can't protect is expenses that aren't excludable, and so then you start to see those showing up in your operating budget line and what it's doing to your levy. And we can see both of those things going on with this tool as we turn more projects on, as we actually nail down the financing. Is it going to come in at 4.25 or 4.5? What is the real cost of the borrowing? How much did we eliminate with free cash, and so we can drop some of that off, and you can see what happens to other things that you do, actions that you might want to take near term that affect the flow of this. So I want to use this to really keep a lid on the levy limit and borrowing and operating costs that are outside of that, and they both can be corrosive. You hire too many people too fast, that could be corrosive. You turn on projects that are too big too fast, you get into trouble. And I think the cardinal, in my mind, the real goal is to stay out of Prop 2.5 overrides, period. But in the end, that's really what you're after. And the second thing you're after is to try to keep the year-on-year increases to both commercial and residential taxpayers from getting too far ahead of what the economy can support. And so that's what you can manage with this kind of a tool. So I don't know what the next steps are with this. I think we need to get the capital plan cleaned up quite a bit. I would make a comment on that. I think we should really focus in on the next 5 years of capital, really focus in on that, and have a 10-year rolling plan. I'm not at all interested in a 20-year plan. I think it's a waste of time right now. We got too much to do. But I'd like to get the capital expectations really tied down and roll those into what's it going to do with exclusions to our levy, to our taxpayers. That, I think, would be a great outcome of this medium to short term. And so you might need to get some help with that, or, but if you guys drive it, it has credibility, honestly. Ways and Means is just a bunch of rookies that talk. So I'd like to see you do that. I don't know what your next steps are. Being, this capital advisory group to do some work with you. Get the 5-year capital plan pinned down and make sure we gussy up how this spreadsheet's working. That's my 2 cents.
Well, it's just two comments. One thing is I'm glad that control the tax increases for both residential and commercial, something we talk about here all the time. That gets left out of a lot of conversations is what happens to the commercial rate and what they're paying also.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is I don't think that the nailing down, I'm quite confident we'll nail down the 1 year for May. I'm less confident about a 5-year. We may have a 5-year projection, but I don't know that.
So could I comment on that? I think there are always surprises, right? I mean, we had the surprise of surprises called PFAS, right? Who in God's name thought we were going to have to spend $umpteen million overnight to overhaul that plant and to do the hookup? But there's nothing you can do about that. Surprises, that's why they're called surprises. But what you can do something about is anticipate well enough, I think over a 5-year horizon, that you've got a pretty good grip on where stuff should slot in, at what amount, and if you can support it or not, and how. And it'll change, every year you slide it. But I think we could do that, John, if we worked at it. I really do. I see some things, like DPW and schools swamp the capital. They just swamp it, right?
Yeah,
Right?
And
so we need to take a harder look at the stuff that's on there for the next 5 years. It can't all happen. What on your
Agreed.
draft?
Agreed.
Yeah, it's
We're not
not
going to
even
spend
close.
$500 million.
Yeah, it's not even close to doable. So we need to start to prune that realistically for a 5-year picture, I think. The sooner we do that, the better.
If I can just add, and I think by us sort of setting what the capacity is, gives us sort of
A guidepost for what you, yeah,
this is what we're aiming at.
right,
And this is what fits in there.
right.
That doesn't mean everybody's going to play nice, but
No, everybody's gonna lobby for what they want, right?
Well, like I say, we've been doing it for years, and just to be honest, I mean, we really prioritize what we consider critical to the operation of the town. So, I mean, I'm always going to vote for a boring sewer pipe over a basketball court renovation. And again, that's a difficult balance for the residents. The residents have wants and needs as well. But like I say, we understand how limited the capacity to fund things is over time, and we really skew to boring, critical infrastructure, HVAC systems to keep buildings going, again, water and sewer infrastructure, roadways.
To your credit, it's unfair for us to imply you haven't been doing that.
No, I'm not suggesting you are. I'm just saying, you know, there may have to be some way to implement you know, some of what the residents, the other things that make Burlington a great community, whether it's great parks, playgrounds, and things of that nature. They don't, when we look at it on a truly black and white, they often don't rise to the funding level just based upon how many critical things need to be done. You know, we need people to be able to flush their toilets. It's kind of important. And again, we kind of view the world in those terms. So there has to be some way to sort of give credence to some of these other projects that do add to the character and that the residents can enjoy without, you know, having us cold-hearted, bureaucratic bean counters deciding what's the most important project, because we have a pretty good idea.
Cold-hearted, bureaucratic bean counters. Have we ever called them that?
Not all in one sentence.
I'm just saying, there is more to it, and we're always going to skew to what we see as a critical infrastructure need, as opposed to something that, you know, could also be critical in different ways to the town, but maybe not rise to the level of going to cause somebody, you know, sewer problems. You know, I hate to keep going back to the sewer pipes.
We want to be able to pressure test our assumptions. That's a term that Ed uses all the time. And times have changed, really. You know, things are a little bit different, the landscape right now, and I think if we give more visibility to this and put more modeling around it, you know, we'll do better. We'll do better. We're less likely to get into trouble. And I think the opportunity to get into trouble is greater over the next 5 years than it's been in the previous 5 years.
Right. I would just say, through all of this, I think it would be helpful if in the end we came out with something that you could put down on a spreadsheet and say, these are the critical infrastructure needs, and they're laid out over the next 10 years. We know we're going to need a fire truck in 5 years, and that's all in there, and sewer pipes and pump and lift stations, and then this the little bit of wiggle room that we have, and these are all the projects that can get slotted in, and kind of to John's point, then if somebody comes, because people aren't aware of the longer term, we're looking at baseball fields here, we're looking at that, then you can come in with this pet project, and if you get people real excited in a 1-week time period and bring kids in their baseball uniforms, you could build a stadium, you know, if you hit town meeting on the right night, and we're, you know, at the right point in the week. So being able to say, these are kind of our musts, and that includes our fire trucks and police cars and sewer, and then this is our wiggle room, and we can decide, and these are all the ideas, and that's kind of, it's a small amount to put a lot of wish into, it's a big list for a little bucket. Anything else? Anybody? Thanks for doing that, and thanks for working with it, helping us understand it better. Okay, other business.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have an update on the police station? Anything, Mike?
I checked with the chief. We haven't had a meeting since Ways and Means last met, so no official meeting to report on, but he's going to try to get one done in the next couple of weeks. I think he's thinking of having maybe a tour of the Vinebrook water treatment plant so we can kind of see where the temporary police station is going to be and the work that needs to be done. He also mentioned that the architect has been doing some work to deal with all the comments for people that were concerned about the side of the police station that sort of faces Grandview Farm. It was kind of that flat, just
Ugly.
The
ugly
flat
part of the building?
side,
Yeah.
yeah, so they're going to, trying to do some things to make it more interesting.
It's called colonial.
Yeah, big mural, things like that. Flowers, horses. Yeah, so that's it. Nothing serious to talk about.
The high school, we talked about it. I think we covered that pretty well. Moving forward, Fox Hill, anything, Roger?
Nothing really outstanding or exciting, maybe a little bit in a second, but they're in the middle of their detailed design,
Yeah.
making another pass at looking at exterior things. They pretty much locked down all of the site stuff, the square footage for playgrounds and this equipment and that equipment, and they're about to turn into the construction phase. They're actually producing construction documents. The one issue that keeps coming up and hasn't been settled is, how do we get solar panels on the roof? And they recently came out with a couple of reports and some spreadsheets about the payoff periods and the investment required, and it's not included in the current budget. There's some good numbers that says that, well, maybe I should, Ed, do you want to just describe what you read too?
Sure. So we've taken an interest in this because it's a separate carved-out project. And we decided to decide later from the very inception of the planning. So the school will be built to support solar installs on the roof and in the parking lot. And then we get to decide to plug that on. And there are two main categories, and reports have been prepared by people with more expertise and knowledge than us to project what building the solar facilities would mean for us, and it would save us on energy. It would get us incentive payments from state and federal sources, and there'd be payments. And it costs as much as $3.5 million to build that. And then the other option is to basically rent your roof. So you can have a company that builds that, and you get a cut of the savings from the energy generation. And in an efficient market, you might expect those, the total NPV of both to be about the same. And I computed the cash flows based on the spreadsheet we just received today, and it's within 1%. So, Milton Friedman was right. And then in deciding between those, the happy news is that it actually makes us money to do solar. So, preliminary recommendation, we get that done somehow. We have to decide what the relative merits of owning this stuff is and adding more borrowing to our debt schedule versus just having a contract. I guess the advantage of building it yourself is you own the panels, and I don't know what the lifespan is after that period that's been projected. Those are details we should look into. But what I can say is that solar is good. Exactly how we get there, we'll have to take a look at.
Yeah, I think the one detail that is in the balance is whether they build whether you have to actually try to cover your entire electric consumption to get to net zero, which means building canopies and putting solar panels in the parking lot. I suspect in the PPA provider agreement that they would rent the roof and they wouldn't build any of the canopies in the parking lot, so they wouldn't get to net zero. Because it's just, it's more construction and still have to be paid for by somebody. I don't think so. So I think the committee still has some choices to make, but I think there will always be some solar on the building. It'll cover some of the costs, but there's still choices to make. And potentially trying to, I guess John left, but trying to figure out, can we come up with $3.5 million to, if we wanted to build it, is there a source for that? Or would the priorities be for something else for that $3.5 million? So, and I don't quite know how that conversation develops. So, anyway, that's pretty much what's going on in Foxville.
Chris, athletic fields?
Yeah, nothing really new to report. They're waiting back to hear on some cost estimates, a number of items. There is a meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'll be at the Bruins game. But I did reach out to Bob today, and he's going to update me with some notes.
As in a butter, they were doing some kind of core samples or something.
I gotta go, Doug. Okay? Sorry, folks.
Have a good evening.
No escrow for you.
No. I got things I gotta get done. Thank you.
Take care.
Roger, you did electronic voting?
Yes, so the electronic voting committee, we have met basically twice a week since the beginning of December. We're going to have a report that says if the hybrid, so at town meeting in September, there were 2 warrant articles, one that was to change the bylaw, the other was to change the special act, which has to be done in tandem, where the bylaw change doesn't do any good. The second one was defeated, so we don't have any changes to the second, or proposed for the State House to approve. So we don't have hybrid meetings, we can't do them. However, the electronic voting committee, we talked about benefits if it's just people in the room, the benefits are fairly minor because it doesn't speed much of anything up except maybe roll calls, and they happen very infrequently. On the other hand, if you actually have hybrid voting and people, on WebEx and working across different devices, where every single vote has to be, counted and accumulated by hand or verbally or something, the extra time needed to run town meeting that way balloons out of proportion. And we actually did 2 town meetings like that, where we did voting on WebEx and polls and that, and it works and it's cheap. There are costs associated with. There are several vendors that support the functionality we need in terms of displaying names and voting and clickers for in the room and remote things out for it. But there's a daunting set of things that have to be put in place to make the whole thing work. There's extra hardware for the machine, there's extra television screens on the stage so everyone can see who's voting, because we're still encouraging transparency. There's extra staffing to be able to run those systems and work with the clerk, which you can rent. Many of the companies that provide the services will rent you a person to run their equipment and their gear. And then there are, procedures of the clerk to change, update. Anyway, there's a lot of different aspects. Many other towns use electronic voting for representative town meeting effectively, some hybrid. And at least in one case, it costs them between, $50,000 and $70,000 a year to do so. Plymouth, for example, has a $65,000 line item for electronic voting in their budget.
Okay.
So it's not cheap, and it's hard to tell where the tip-over point is between, if you have 3 people in hybrid, you can probably easily do the voting by hand, manually, and not slow things down too much. But you figure somewhere between, 8 and 10, it starts to go to get so that every vote is stretched out in time, so it's not effective. So roughly, that's where we're headed. We're trying to figure out exactly how to communicate the fact that the advantage is in something that benefits you on every vote and only if it's hybrid.
Okay. Thank you. Cheyenne, marijuana,
I have not heard anything from anyone.
All right.
Yeah.
I haven't been told about a meeting, but they did ask us for a representative. I don't know that they ever had a meeting.
Yeah, beyond what you told me earlier.
Yeah. All right. Minutes from November 6th. I did get some changes. I've made those changes and sent it back out this afternoon. Any other additional changes? Motion?
Motion approved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Gotcha. And do I have another motion?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you.